Welcome back to After the Ashes. This is the beautiful Altadena podcast that breaks down legislation recovery after our little wildfire up in Altadena. I'm your co-host Steve here, and I'm here with Shauna Dawson-Beer.
Hello.
And this is episode 10, Philanthropy in Power. Who's rebuilding Altadena and why? And this is the one I think where I get in trouble, right, Shauna?
This is the one where Steve's definitely going to get into it. If the last episode was heavy on me, this one is the Steve show. So, Steve, let's talk about our philanthropy and
all right, yeah.
How did we get there? Frame it up for us.
All right, yeah. So,
like so many homes, frame it up for us.
Well, I don't know if we can frame anymore. I think we have to modular build. So philanthropy is an interesting topic. It's the hidden dynamic in all of this rebuild because so much of what we're doing, everybody's looking to philanthropy to be the leader on this. And, you know, philanthropy has a tremendous role in our community. And these fires have really brought it out as the role of, you know, helping stand people up, dealing with the gaps that exist between federal or government money and, you know, industry. But philanthropy it's changed a lot. And so, you know, back about a month ago, I wrote 3 pieces on the Substack about philanthropy. It started,
Philanthropy I,
Philanthropy 1, 2, and 3.
and Philanthropy 3.
Very creatively, titled.
Yes.
But, you know, the first one was obviously like the background. Why is philanthropy in the role it is today? How has it kind of changed and morphed over the years? And, you know, if you think about it, you know, the early part of the 20th century, philanthropy was the primary driver of community well-being and community good. And as the growth of the state took place, you know, through the New Deal and then the Great Society in the 1960s and the subsequent legislation in the 70s under Nixon, you know, you had this shift where the government kind of moved into a lot of the roles that philanthropy took, and philanthropy kind of was more a sidecar to the government as opposed to the government being a sidecar to philanthropy. And, you know, as it exists today, philanthropy, I think the number is something like $4 trillion in assets under management for private foundations nationally. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of firepower available. I'd have to look at the numbers again. It was in Philanthropy 2 for LA, but I think that number is around $50 billion in assets available here in the city of the county of Los Angeles.
It's incredible.
So and that was just the bigger ones. Now, again, a chunk of that is the Getty philanthropy, which focuses on the museum. But nevertheless, like these are asset pools that are hugely valuable. There's community foundations, which are part of this as well. And again, don't forget, universities are also philanthropies, and they have billions of dollars available as assets. So there's a whole industry here, or a whole sector here that, you know, we can look to be part of this catalytic funding stack that we're looking at as we're looking to rebuild. The knee-jerk originally, and I've talked to many in philanthropy, has been philanthropy is going to rebuild Altadena, Pasadena, you know, the Palisades. Like that's their job. It's not. Philanthropy doesn't have the asset base to do it. It's very much like tax increment financing. It can do a portion of it. It can do targeted areas.
It has a role.
But philanthropy is more of a convener. And what philanthropy can really do, and, you know, the California Community Foundation is a great example of this, and their Department of Angels that they stood up, is they act as sort of a clearinghouse for aligning the various groups around specific policy questions. And so that's sort of what we need to look at philanthropy as, you know, yes, they have the assets, but they also have a tremendous amount of resource capability in our community. And that's the way I've looked at philanthropy. So as another aside, one of the things I've been working on prior to the fires is reimagining the nonprofit world and looking at philanthropy as making, you know, Mackenzie Scott, who is the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos, and she has this organization called Yield Giving. She has billions of dollars she's giving away, and she literally just calls you up and says one day, we're going to give you $25 million, but you're only going to get it once, and you need to make it sustainable. So really that's what this is all about, is how can we, looking at philanthropy, reimagine it, again, like everything else we're looking at with these fires, to make it sustainable and regenerative, and sustainable not from an environmental perspective, but sustainable from an investment perspective, where we take in some money and we make that money continue to seed again and again and again. We're not going back for subsequent rounds of funding to support our community as we stand up Altadena.
Can you walk us through kind of what the landscape is? You just mentioned CCF, DOA.
Yeah.
Again, back to letters and so many letters.
I'm
many letters and
not
numbers.
allowed to say anything about DOA anymore, but yes.
I just, for the sake of, well, we just saw that as an example. But
Yeah.
Can we talk about kind of what the landscape looks like and currently for Altadena and how these orgs are going to be a piece of this? Like we have an LTRG now, a long-term recovery group.
Right, but they're getting money from the private private foundation. So
Right.
here in Los Angeles, the major player is so there's community foundations and then there's private philanthropies. Now, private philanthropies are what you would think of when you think of very wealthy people creating a trust that then uses that money to invest in communities to help, for charitable intent. The Getty family, for one. Annenberg is the big one here that's involved with the fires. Amundsen, you've seen the name all over.
The city.
The
It's
city,
everywhere.
yeah. The Broad
Amundsen
Theater
Theater.
family, these big, the Milken family, like these are big names of big, wealthy families that are using their money to help give back to the community, right? That's the private foundation side. The other side is something called a community foundation. Now, a community foundation is, think about it not so much as, yes, it's a philanthropy, but it also manages money on behalf of wealthy donors. They're called donor-advised funds. So I, as a wealthy donor, say, I'm going to give $5 million to California Community Foundation, but I want you to give it to, 3 universities and 4 other charities, and you just manage it for me, and that's the donor-advised fund. Now, what California Community Foundation then gets to do is then take those donor-advised funds and invest those, and whatever's left over, the profit they make after their expenses is it's called discretionary money. And that is the money that CCF gives to community groups or nonprofits, or we call them CBOs, community-based nonprofits. Those groups are getting their money out of that discretionary fund. Now, Pasadena also has a community foundation. It's smaller than the CCF. CCF has something like $2 or $3 billion under management. I think Pasadena's is about $50 million. So, I mean, there's a different scale, obviously. But at the end of the day, these community foundations they're sort of seed money to initiatives, and then they catalyze other private foundations that are associated with them to grow them. And that's sort of what they do. So back to your question, it's these two groups that are sort of driving a lot of the funding that's occurring here among the community groups in Altadena.
So with that, what happens next? Right? What happens, because, we're talking, you just gave us some numbers, millions, even hundreds, tens of millions. But we know that what we need and what we're talking about, and this goes back to all of our conversations, is billions.
Yes.
We are a multi-billion-dollar project, not tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even though, tens of millions or even just $1 million is a significant number for an MPO, right? Especially for some of our very grassroots orgs that are on
$50,000.
Exactly.
And that was a lot of money.
Yep,
to
exactly.
stand them up.
So, some got 100, 150,
Yeah. But that's the thing is that.
But then what?
But those are the seeds. Like that is what the community foundations will do is they seed them, see which organizations survive, which organizations thrive, which organizations, the charitable intent of those organizations, does it meet the need of the moment? At the time, they were doing what's called capacity building, right? So the idea was to build up the capacity of these organizations to be able to attend to a certain function, whether it's a certain community, whether it's a certain cause, whatever it is. And we had, dozens of groups that were stood up and built out or that were catalyzed through this process. So they were already existing, but they were, brought together and, really pushed up through the process of, the initial money. Now we're at that point where it's, okay, what's the follow-on money going to be?
Right.
And, one of the questions I've asked, and I haven't seen anybody else ask it, and I'd love to see a study on this, is how much of the money that's been distributed to the community groups is, I would say, original money versus money that came from the Wildfire Aid Fund?
FireAid money.
Yes.
For anyone listening, the FireAid money, because a lot of those grants that went to community MPOs, because much to the chagrin of all the fire survivors, there was no mechanism for direct funding for people for fire survivors to be directly funded from FireAid money. It goes to all the nonprofits, community groups, orgs doing the work on the ground. So many of them were funded this way.
Yep.
And now what? What happens when that money runs out?
Well, and that's a really good question. And who's going to follow on with that money? Like, is there going to be, there's still some money left at Annenberg and at the Pasadena Community Foundation.
And Annenberg, for anyone who does not realize this, Annenberg is administrating the FireAid money.
Yeah. So there's still money there that hasn't been spent. And the question is that money then going to go as follow-on funding to the organizations that survive? Or, what? This is sort of one of the questions that I have. But many of these groups have been used in our community to try to align around initiatives like SB 782 and some of these broader policy questions. And so they brought community alignment around these objectives, working in conjunction with the electeds and the policymakers. So they've served a purpose. The question is, what is their purpose going to be post next week when these bills are signed or vetoed?
Right.
And
we say next week right now, but when you listen to this, it'll be this week.
Yeah.
When you hear this,
depending on when you post it.
Yes. When you hear this podcast, will probably be it'll be a matter of what happened, and there'll be some very interesting follow-ups next week.
Yeah. So I think that there's going to be a shakeout there, so that'll be interesting. I think also one of the things that is being very overlooked right now is the macro level questions that are occurring in philanthropy. If you look at my Philanthropy 3, this is something that I was really talking about, is the federal funding environment is shifting. And many people look at it as the federal government is cutting money that otherwise was spent, given to communities. What, in some respects, I get that, but on the other hand, what the federal government's also doing is they're scaling back their role to being the sidecar to philanthropy, because you have $4 trillion in assets that need to be allocated. Why isn't philanthropy taking on a more active role in the community? Why are we reliant on the federal government to do seed money and capacity building and these types of initiatives for projects that have grown tremendously over the years? And whether you're right or wrong, that's just where we are. And we are spending trillions of dollars more than we have, and we need to start scaling things back. So it's not a Republican talking point. I'm just telling you what they're saying in D.C.
Right.
And so when you look at things like the Section 8 money that's being potentially cut, vouchers are going to go down by 50%. We've increased the number of incentives to build the homes. But I think what the government is saying is, okay, if you're going to catalyze your money now, figure out how you're going to do your economic development to bring in jobs to break the cycle, as opposed to continuing to put out, everybody. We're going to cut back the money that's going to be available and make it more targeted. And I think that who steps into that basis? Is it going to be the philanthropy to step in and fill that void? We got a $700 million potential shortfall in the county's health budget in terms of operating the hospitals and county USC and some of the others. Who's going to step in to do that with the $700 million? That's typically where philanthropy was. This is where philanthropy typically stepped in. 2/3 of the continuum of care that was typically funded through HUD for homelessness is going to be cut. Again, who's going to step into that void? Look, when you talk about like community development block grants outside of the disaster recovery ones, it's $4 billion a year nationally. So, for us here in LA, it's probably 50 million or so that's available. Can philanthropy step in and take a chunk of that? Philanthropy has tens of billions of dollars available in terms of assets. Are they being properly allocated? And I think that that's sort of the theme that's being asked here is, are we properly using the assets? And I think that what's happening in Altadena, and I think that this is the pressure we're going to feel, is as this macro level pressure is coming from up top, we're going to feel it down below, because we're going to be the ones sitting there going, hey, we need your help, philanthropy. And philanthropy is going to go, look, guys, you got bigger things. We got bigger fish to fry. And are these community groups going to continue to be funded? I've said to people who are funded by community groups and philanthropy, I said, you guys better look at this funding very seriously, because I don't know how long it's going to last with these macro level trends. And I think that this is something that's very serious and something very real. And I think that the expectation that philanthropy is going to solve all of our problems or even be a huge part of the solution is probably misplaced right now.
I've had these conversations too with a few people where I've candidly asked, how long of a runway do you have and what's next? And the answer is always, we don't know, we're working on it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the nonprofit world. Mm-hmm. That's very typical.
Yep.
However, I think the big shift is going to be the competition from these bigger issues that philanthropy typically was created to solve in the first place. Philanthropy is going to have to go back to its core. It's not going to have time for a lot of these peripheral questions. And again, while Altadena, where's the major question going to be? I think it's going to be affordable housing. I think if there's anything that philanthropy is going to focus its attention on, it's going to be affordable housing. It's going to be getting people with minimal resources back into homes and figuring out a way to do it in a way that's affordable for them to maintain what they had before.
And what does that mean? Is that supporting CLTs?
No.
Is it supporting a foundation like Green Line that's trying to buy up lots to keep people?
I think it's going to be a broader.
Is it supporting SB 9 and densification because we all believe misguidedly because builders, developers are forced to have X number of quote unquote low income units? That's the fix, because as we know, it's not the fix.
But we don't even know if builders are going to come and build big units that are going to have that. I think you've got to go back to the basics. I think you got to go back to the ground level. And this is what I've said to Annenberg, is I've said, I think you got to go back to the heart of the issue here, which is how do you get somebody back into a house for $800,000? Right. How do you create that model to get somebody back into an 1,800 square foot house? And get, one of the questions that we need to have answered is the assessor question, but putting that aside for a minute, how can you get somebody who lost everything, who had no insurance, into an affordable model that's going to be less than them going and renting an apartment in the community? There's a way to do it, and philanthropy can be a big part of this. The thing is it's going to take leadership, and it's going to take skills, and it's going to take a lot of people bringing really interesting dynamics together.
So how do we do it? It's a simple question, Steve.
I wrote a Substack.
Fix all of our problems.
I can't because, I've written the Substack on it, but there's a way to break it out where we can get there.
Yeah.
And I don't want to belabor it. It's a long, drawn-out process.
So I know we had a reader question, actually. A reader had asked, if people are not building apartments in LA, why is Altadena going to become an apartment mecca? And I think that we had discussed that this question is very nuanced and complicated. And you said it goes back, to the fact that this isn't 94. Recovery may be longer and slower than investors can handle. We could have, vacant buildings like downtown does. And actually, I love that this is where you've kind of framed this, because I was actually, with a journalist from a major national publication yesterday, and we were talking about all manner of things. As the story that they're working on largely is around housing and access and rebuild. And this is one of the topics we touched on, and I was like, this isn't new, right? We were approving these mixed use projects in part because of SB 9, but also because there are ways that they fit within our CSD prior to SB 9 into our commercial corridors on Lincoln, on Lake, to some degree on Fair Oaks. And, we have a couple, right? Like we have that one, what is that? Where there's a yoga studio, or at least there was. It's across the street from Coffee Gallery, kind of cat-a-corner from Coffee Gallery, just south of there, but still on the Altadena border. And it's a bunch of loft units above. And I don't know if those are, if they're at capacity, but both the retail spaces took forever to lease out, and those lofts took forever to lease out because, shocker, they're still not affordable. And who wants to live in a loft in Altadena? It was like that, right? Like a modern downtown loft. It's a very curious thing. So it was like, great, it's working out so well already. Let's build more.
Well, this is one of those questions that I had, and I was talking about this before, is, you have this dual narrative that's going on right now. On the one hand, you have this idea that we're going to just densify everything and that's going to solve all of our problems. Build, 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 build. I mean, you go to Sacramento, that's all anybody's talking about is build, 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 build. That's how we're going to get out of our housing crisis. Yet you have that report that, I went back and forth with a reader on that came out of the state. It said by 2060, Los Angeles is going to lose 20% or almost 20% of its population that they're projecting. 20% people. That's 2 million
So who's
people.
Who is that? Who's projecting it? Because
state.
I know. Okay, it's the state's.
State.
This is the state's belief.
Yeah, this is the state's budget analyst is saying, or something. The Department of Finance is saying we're expecting to lose 20% of the population here in Los Angeles County.
Even though, and I think it is important to position that there's been a lot of fuss around the fact that everyone's leaving California. California's too expensive. California sucks. Everyone wants to go to Texas and Vegas and wherever the heck
people
else
don't
they're
want to
going.
leave California.
But
they just don't have a choice.
Well, exactly. But also, those numbers are largely skewed. As many come in as go out. Like we're not bleeding people.
We are bleeding population. We're not growing. And this is the thing: is that California.
And who is growing? Is anybody growing?
Yeah, Texas, Florida. But I mean, what it is that if we're going to lose 20% of our population, and we're going to have the portion of the population that's going to be over the age of 65 selling in the next 10 to 15 years, what's that going to do to the single-family home? If we go build all this capacity, and you're going to have all these properties go on the market, what's that going to do to housing prices? And then how does that implode our economy, too? Yes, it's good to bring down the affordability costs to a point, but at what point does that become detrimental to us? We're on this weird cycle where it's not just a continual growth. We also have a situation where, yes, we have people come to California, but a lot of people are leaving if they have to raise a family. They can't afford to raise a family here.
Right.
And so they come here when they're 20s. If they can stay, they stay. If they got to go, they got to go. And, we're losing Hollywood. We're nobody can dispute the fact the entertainment industry has fallen on tough times. People are going to Vancouver, they're going to Canada, they're going to New York, they're going to the UK.
Exactly. They're leaving the country.
They're paying lower costs in labor, and they're getting tax credits to do the whole thing. I don't agree with the tax credit piece, but that's a whole different story of my own. But it is what it is. And, at least when we lost aerospace in the late 90s, we still had Hollywood. We don't have Hollywood to back us up. And aerospace, while it's a growing part of our economy, if you read all about it, it's a huge part of it. It's not going to ever employ people like it did in the 90s and 80s. You're not going to have the big plants building C-17s down in Long Beach.
Well, I mean, even if you're NASA JPL, what is it? 80+% of their workforce is currently being laid off.
Yeah, it's a huge, huge problem. And I think...
And that's a federal problem, which I think it's important to make that distinction.
But as much as it's a federal problem, it's an Altadena problem. Because
Correct.
Guess what? Where do those people live?
Yep.
And so who's going to buy $1.5 million homes in Altadena if there are no jobs? If the entertainment industry is declining, if JPL it doesn't have the jobs to pay, these good paying jobs for engineers and support staff and people that are taking rockets to Mars and putting telescopes out into outer space. I mean, people, it's real.
It is real. I think there's as we think about it and talk about it, there's a few sides to the story, right? A few sides to consider. On we've heard quite a bit about how like for example, LA Times had a big story that broke recently, comparing all of the various rebuilds and how ultimately 2/3 of populations were lost after fires like this. And I maintain, a lot of people post that as very much like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling, we're dead, like we'll never have the tax base we need to do anything ever again, the town's be half empty. I don't think that's real. I do think that despite all the very real challenges that you just laid out, and they are real for not just for us, not just for county, for the entire state. These are very real ongoing problems that were not created by the fire, but are exacerbated now by the fire.
Yeah.
Right? And that we have to now live with and contend with. But, I do still maintain that, here we are going to be different. People do want housing here, despite there are a lot of people who have remote jobs, other things, and there will be. But it's going to be a very, very different community when you have all these new people coming in who are spending 1.5, north of 1.5. It was already changing during the pandemic when we had people, like for example, on my block, someone moved in who is new, to the community, who paid over $1 million cash for their little Jane's cottage in the middle of the pandemic. That was a very different neighbor than the rest of our neighbors. Not that they were bad. They weren't great. But, it is a very different kind of neighbor in a different community. You do start to you lose some of the funk and the quirk that has made our very creative, diverse community what it has been and why it is so special. But I do want to say that I don't think, we're going to lose it all. People are going to come back. A lot of people are going to come back, but perhaps not at the pace people believe.
Well, I think if you want it to be done right, this is the part. Everybody's focused on real estate. Everyone's focused on development. When I came out to LA after dealing with my stuff in DC, and my readers will know this story, I was brought in to look at the West LA VA. They were going to do homeless housing there. And they were renegotiating the enhanced use lease and all this other stuff that was going on down there. And, they said, Steve, we want you involved in fraud, waste, and abuse. And I'm like, nope, thank you. Because, I'm a procurement guy. Like, I get that side of things. And I go, it was just too political. And then they go, no, Steve, we really want you to look at this. I said, all right. And then the people in D.C. that I talked to said, give us an idea of what's going on the ground. Half of LA City Council is going to be indicted in the next little while anyway. That was when Huizar was getting indicted. And
Oops.
It was a really interesting time politically. I want to write a play.
I have some things to say about Huizar too, but not for this podcast.
A book about this. But anyway, or even a TV show. But the point was, when I looked at it and I actually got to understand it, and the guy I work with who's a finance genius and a CPA, looked at it, we started learning about LIHTCs, low-income housing tax credits, and we saw the deal was all about LIHTCs. And we said, well, where's the economic development side? Like, you want to do mixed use, but where are the jobs? You've got people who are homeless, but 40% of people who are homeless because they can't afford to live in the housing that they're in, not because they're destitute and on the street. They're on the street because their jobs are not meeting the need of where they are. And if we look at homelessness and we talk about this, and we look at 70,000 people are homeless every day right now in LA County.
I would like to know how many more just in Altadena, as I'm aware of neighbors still living in tents on their properties and neighbors now recently running out of ALE and living in their cars. I think we've talked about this before. But
my point being, if 40% of the people are 70,000 and we can find good employment for that would be a significant drop in homelessness and a huge victory for the model. But the problem was the money is around real estate. The money is allocated to that. Job training, breaking the cycle, creating a sustainable job, building wealth, doing all these things. It wasn't at the top of the list for the philanthropic organizations and the government organizations that were addressing this problem. They want to build assets and get money. And so that's where it is. At every dollar you took away from a real estate project was $1 less that was available to put somebody into something, put a roof over someone's head. So it was a competition for dollars, and those dollars were what they were. Here we are, we're in Altadena. Think about this on a macro level, right? Like, the money is going to be allocated to building our community back and building homes to get people into them, which is the primary concern. We also need to figure out how the hell we're going to be able to fill these homes and keep these people employed and keep our residents employed. And that's the economic development piece. And that's the part that nobody's talking about, except for me. And that's the part that I think, philanthropy is part of this. We have a window here for 24 months after the fire left, because we've already used up 12 of the months trying to get this stuff moving, to grab money from the banks to be able to bring businesses in. We got JPL on its ass, to be honest.
Yep.
We've got tremendous challenges, but it's also opportunity. And this is where our leaders really need to start stepping up and looking at it and catalyzing the assets we have. Philanthropy can be part of this. They have $50 billion in assets. Why can't they take some of that corpus, which is the money of the assets, not the profit they earn, which is what they distribute to their recipients, but the actual corpus, and invest in our stuff and be seed capital to some of these broader initiatives? We need to start thinking different. And we have a city that is looking at, we can look at it we can exacerbate the decline, or we can shift to the future. And that's the crossroads we're at right now. And so that's why I'm so passionate about this, because I feel like we can either sit there and lament about what's happening and we can't change what's been done, But what we can change is how the future is going to look. And so that's really where my head is, and that's what I've been fighting for. So, sorry, that was my rant. I apologize.
You were due for a rant. You haven't had one in a few episodes. I do want to bring it back, though, because we had some things to discuss on the timeline, right? For rebuild, like what this looks like for real in Altadena. Some neighbors are already building. Some of those are developers. Some of those are people who had permits prior to the fire and who lost construction during the fire. So they were able to get going quickly. Others are new rebuilds, which is fantastic. And it looks like all in all, we have about 150 permits issued currently. That was the last number. I don't know if that's gone up a bit since, but the last number was 150. And again, for context, that's 150 of at least 6,000 single-family homes and another 3,000 multi. That's a lot of housing. We're talking about 2%, maybe. So it's a lot to be done. And while I do maintain and truly believe that Altadena will rebuild and will be largely rebuilt much more rapidly than we have seen from after other catastrophic events like this, like ours, because of the nature of who we are and where we are. I think it's also important to understand the timeline of that we will be a construction zone for 7 to 10 years, that even, some of the developers who people have been thinking, maybe philanthropy, who it seems are not philanthropy, and I'll leave, because there are some stories that are going to break, I will leave details of who and what out. But I mean, one person who was spoken to who had purchased 15 lots shared that their timeline for developing those lots and building the homes and selling them was about 10 years, because it was 10 years that they thought it would take for the town to be back to where it should be for them to recoup on that investment. So that's our food for thought. That's it. That's the real talk. And, I get, a lot of shit for being negative, that, I'm negative. I'm not even remotely negative. I'm one of those positive fucking people you're going to meet. But also, I'm a realist. The trend is your friend, I'd like to say, because it's true. Like, the data often doesn't lie. And, this is what we're looking at. I'm also aware of, and Steve, I shared this with you, in another conversation, that, we have a number of neighbors, just people I personally am aware of on the streets surrounding us, who are elder, who do not plan to rebuild or cannot rebuild anytime soon, but who also have no plans to sell. Those lots are going to sit empty a real long time. You've got even people like myself who, I won't even consider the rebuild because I financially cannot until after the lawsuits are settled and I see where we land and what we've got or what we don't, right? So it's a lot of us are in a very precarious spot. There are a lot of balls up in the air, so many unknowns. But ultimately, I think this all circles back to the money. Where is it? Where is it coming from? Philanthropy is not going to be there to save the day as much as we would like them to be. Noble projects like CLTs, which I am fully support, are very sadly not going to have the money they need to do anything in time to make a meaningful impact. I maintain it is all about scale. I maintain that every lot saved and every family kept in Altadena is a worthy endeavor, and it's worth it, right? But it's going to be a few, not hundreds, and certainly not thousands, and that's the scale that we need. And how do we get there?
Well, and to close out, I go back to, I think we also have to broaden our thoughts on this one, because I think it's more than just housing. It's how are we going to build back our town and all the things that we have and take advantage of the assets that we have available to us right now. We've been relatively negative, as you said.
Well, real. I don't think negative, but real.
Sorry, critical. How's
Yeah.
critical? I think, though, that if you really want to, there's tremendous opportunity here, too. Tremendous opportunity for the community to rebuild itself in a way that I think allows it to sustain for many years beyond, and a lot of assets we can put in place that can continue to pay dividends and support a lot of the initiatives that people want to have initiatives or want to have supported, and give us self-sustaining models that can exist way beyond what anybody's ever imagined. Now, we have to start at square one, which is, get through the here and now. But the tools are there. I mean, let's be honest. We can do this. and I know exactly how to do it. I've been writing about it. Anybody who's been reading knows it's in there.
And that, everyone, will be the subject of another episode entitled Philanthropy II. Electric Boogaloo. And then maybe we'll be on video and we'll get Steve to dance for us. I think we're going to wrap this one up. And as we know, I like to wrap these up with a small business shout out. So we'll get right into that. This week it is Altadena Ale House. If you're not familiar, they are on Fair Oaks. The proprietor, Gail's Place, is one of the few on that stretch of Fair Oaks that survived the fire. They're directly across from Mountain View Cemetery. They're one of our longer standing businesses. Gail's been around before kind of what I would call the new wave of business, and bars in particular and wine shops hit Altadena. It was them and the Rancho. That's it. And sadly, we don't have the Rancho. Rancho on North Lake did not make it. Rancho, for those who didn't know, was like our very illustrious, fabulous dive bar, and who I believe is rebuilding. I don't know how you rebuild a dive bar.
I hope it's not like the boat where they kind of built it and it's just more,
A bar.
Yeah, it's not the same.
I know. I only hope that the crowd at the Rancho will make it the same. And if Beth comes back with that Bloody Mary, I think there's hope. But for the Ale House, again, for those who haven't been, the Ale House has indoor space, a really cute little bar, a little back patio, and very kind of always surprisingly to me, a really great French wine collection beyond just beer, because Gail spent a lot of time in France and does spend a lot of time in France. And I know Steve was saying the ale selection's good too.
The beer's great.
Yeah, I can't drink beer, so I don't. It's off my radar, but I know
I'm a beer snob.
They've got, there you go. They've got some good stuff. They also have a nice little charcuterie plate if you feel the need to eat something when you drink. Sometimes it's advised.
They have pizza too.
You can well. I mean, the open policy, the unspoken policy was that you could bring pizza from Pizza Venice.
Oh,
okay, which doesn't exist.
There being some food there.
Yeah, no. Gail does do some pizzas too. So if you ask, you can get a pizza, and if you ask really nice, she will bring in a gluten-free pizza. But you've got to become a regular for that. Yeah. But it's a great spot. It's a great community spot, especially if you're like me and you just kind of miss being around your people, our people. It's a good one to drop in and have a drink. And it's also, I believe. I say I believe because we're recording this a second time after a little technical difficulty, and I don't want to miss anything. It's also a great spot for footy. If you're a Brit, it's footy. If you're in the rest of the world, it's football. Not American football, what the rest of the world calls football. They also play rugby. They also do, major U.S. games. But it's a really great spot if you want to catch the football and rugby leagues.
Do you find it funny that 3 of the organizations we've talked about in this conversation, well, we didn't bring in the Good Neighbor Bar, but it's all about alcohol up there in Altadena.
It needs to be right now, Steve. I think, even if you have to take solace in a mocktail, you need something to drown your sorrows in. It doesn't even have to be alcohol.
I was teasing.
Right? It's true, though. So I'm Shauna Dawson Beer, Beautiful Altadena. You can find Beautiful Altadena online on all of your socials. Instagram, Facebook, where our private groups are for locals only. I don't post to TikTok, but we're there. We are everywhere, Beautiful Altadena, and also on our Substack, which is also where you can find Steve.
Yep, the AltaPolicyWonk.
On Substack.
And that's the only place you're going to find me.
And as always, if you want to drop us a note, a line, a comment, just say hi, beautifulaltadenaog@gmail.com.
You can send all your nasty grams for me to Shauna. I'm cool with that.
I can't wait to read. I can't wait to field those. Great. I have nothing else to do. And if you want to find our podcast, you can find it anywhere you're streaming a podcast, from Spotify to Apple Podcasts to YouTube. Anywhere you find your podcast, you should be able to find us, Beautiful Altadena, After the Ashes. We'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.